World Trade Organization's purpose is to enhance living standards of people, of its member countries, of which there are 164, help create employment, and support sustainable development. So it's all about making people's lives better. And it is one of the 3 bodies, organizations created for economic governance of the world. It was the IMF, which you all know, the World Bank, and the WTO. The first 2 are based in Washington, the WTO in Geneva. And it governs the rules. It presides over the rules that govern world trade. So for instance, if there were no WTO, it means that when Ghana tries to sell its cocoa, coffee, gold, oil, there's no predictability. The people you're selling to can charge you any customs duties or tariffs they want. Maybe they tell you they're going to charge 18%, but when the goods arrive, they say it's 100%. There are no rules, anything goes, so it becomes survival of the fittest. But when you're a member of the WTO, which takes years just to become a member, you have to do so many reforms, it means there are some basic rules agreed about how countries trade with each other, which type of tariffs they can charge each other, what type of rules they must obey when trading, so that when you sell your products, there's predictability. You don't have to fear that halfway on the ship, they're going to charge you something else or even stop the goods from coming in. So it is at the lifeline of survival for countries, because we all must trade to survive. So I wanted people to understand what it does, because I told people if they don't know what the WTO does on my continent and in my country, then we haven't started. So coming now to the specific issue which Dr. Mensah posed, what we tried to do at our ministerial conference last year, where Ghana was also quite active, is that we tried to look at those agreements that will be beneficial, especially to us here. There were some ongoing agreements that the WTO has been negotiating for many years without success, without being able to conclude, because it's a consensus organization, meaning that every member must agree before you can get an agreement. It's not like let's say the World Bank or the IMF, where it shares, you know, based on economic power. So the richer countries have greater power. At the WTO, everyone is equal. Every country is equal, from the smallest island to the largest US. They all have the same voice, which is wonderful, because it means developing countries have a strong voice, but it also means gridlock sometimes, because getting everyone to agree is difficult. Nevertheless, we were able to break the impasse last June to negotiate, conclude some agreements. The fisheries. Why is fisheries negotiating away $22 billion in harmful fisheries subsidies that allow big ships to come and fish the waters and overfish, so that our fishermen and women don't have access? It's very important. There are 260 million people that depend on fisheries for a livelihood in the world, 12 million in Africa. And I know there are many Ghanaian fishermen and women along the coast. But many of them don't survive because the waters are what? Overfished. I know that from Ghana, there's a place I have near Lagos on the coast, and there are a lot of Ghanaian fisherwomen and men who have migrated there and are living right next to me. And I asked them, why are they there? Why did they leave Ghana? They said because they can't find any fish in their waters. This agreement, therefore, goes to the basics. If we want the fishermen and women in this country to have a livelihood, we must stop the overfishing and the illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing in the high seas. That's what this agreement does. So it really speaks to something fundamental to us. So that's the first one. Another agreement we're able to come to has to do with food. As you know, because of the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war, food prices have risen very high. And that is compounded by issues like climate change, where some countries are experiencing droughts. They cannot grow food, others are floods, like Pakistan. All Pakistan's crops were flooded, 80% lost. So food prices have been going high. At the WTO, what members did initially was to put export restrictions and say, oh, price of food is high, therefore no one can export food from my country. What does that do? It makes the price of food globally climb even higher. Wheat, rice, oils, all these things. What we did at the WTO is to get members to sign an agreement to drop those export restrictions, because we found they were making food even more scarce and more costly. So price of food is high here due to a number of factors. But one of the things I can tell you is that without that agreement, it would be even worse. And inflation, food inflation will be higher. We also had an agreement to drop all restrictions for humanitarian food supplies. Before, our members had restrictions so that when the World Food Programme wants to buy food to feed people in the Horn of Africa, they couldn't. Now we dropped all of that. So those are just to give you some examples of the things that we're doing that strike immediately at the needs of people. And that's what we were able to negotiate. There were some other agreements. I want to mention one last one. When we were here in the midst of COVID, there were no vaccines. Do you remember? Initially, we had none. African countries were at the back of the queue because we don't manufacture vaccines. We don't manufacture many pharmaceuticals. We import 99% of the vaccines we need on the continent and 90% of the pharmaceuticals. So we didn't have any capacity. And those who were rich were able to buy up the vaccines whilst we waited. So at the WTO, we have an agreement called the TRIPS, the Intellectual Property, it's an agreement about intellectual property and patents, which is lodged at the WTO, which means that you cannot go and manufacture things without proper permission. Otherwise, you are exploiting the intellectual property of others. So we had to, developing countries made a petition that this agreement should be waived, aspects of it, so that we can manufacture vaccine, COVID-19 vaccines here. But when I came, this was stuck at the WTO. So we had to go to great lengths to try to get that agreement, to get the waiver that was being sought, so that on the continent we can manufacture COVID-19 vaccines. Now, His Excellency, Mr. President, has been working really hard to get manufacturing capacity here. I know that. But this agreement will enable us for the next 5 years, any country that wants to manufacture can get the waiver to do that. So that was another thing we agreed.